Hello and welcome back. Where to invest in the Middle East is the topic today. We're focusing predominantly on one country that's taken measured steps to attract foreign investment that's not just centred around oil. Well, in the studio today is Dr. Christian Koch from the Gulf Research Centre here in Geneva. Christian, welcome back to the studio.
Thank you.
Now, Kuwait, Christian. We know Kuwait is an oil-rich country, but it's been making efforts of late to try and boost its private sector. What's the main challenge the country faces at the moment as it tries to do this?
Well, I think Kuwait's major challenge right now is to bring about a measure of political stability, given much of the political infighting that has happened in recent years. I think you need to remember, yes, Kuwait is headed by a ruling family and is dominated in that sense by the monarchy. But it also has had a very lively parliament. In fact, it's has a parliament in place since 1963. And in more recent years, parliament has tried to infringe more on the executive branch of government to curtail authoritarian legislation in the country. So since 2006, we've actually had a situation where parliament has put the executive more to the task, has questioned ministers, has infringed on many of these executive power, decision-making powers. The result has been that we have had 8 governments in Kuwait since 2006. We've seen the legislature being dissolved on 7 occasions. And more recently, with the decision of the emir to try to change the electoral law, there's been an election boycott, which has further deteriorated the political situation. And this has infringed on, of course, many economic issues as well, and has put doubts on the fact of how far Kuwait is ready to go in terms of diversification of its economy.
Now, Christian, Kuwait's economy has been suffering of late from poor performance. You mentioned an election boycott there. Am I right in saying that the government in Kuwait is a legitimate government? It's just the opposition has boycotted it. Surely this whole process is just going to hamper improving Kuwait's economic performance.
No, absolutely. I mean, yes, the government is still highly legitimate. Parliament just simply involves itself also on many of the economic decisions, which is a case you do not have, for example, in the UAE. As a result, many of the efforts by the Kuwaiti government to make initiatives on economic diversification, on major projects, have been hampered by the fact that Parliament has raised objections. The privatization of Kuwait Airways hasn't gone forward. The big project Kuwait, a 25-year, $7 billion investment programs to boost oil production in the northern oil fields, has not moved forward. This thing was put forward in 1997, but it has never been put in place because of objections of the parliament and a failure of the government to build enough consensus inside the country to move it forward. A major joint venture between Kuwait Petroleum Corporation and Dow Chemicals, which was a $17 billion investment in the country, was also failed to materialize because parliament refused to approve the joint venture. So on all these items, we haven't seen forward movement. So
essentially, this the issue now with a boycott of the election is creating the same problems. This is perhaps then we'd assume then that the UAE is so far ahead of Kuwait because of this political infighting, because of these problems in Parliament.
Absolutely, this is one of the case. I mean, Kuwait is the only Gulf country that is actually a net exporter of capital rather than importer. It only attracted $10 billion of investment last year compared to $85 billion by the UAE. And it's because investors simply don't have the confidence that many of the projects that are on the books in Kuwait have seen the light of day or will get pushed through despite parliamentary objections.
Okay, so if I was an investor then, and I was looking to invest in parts of the Middle East, but I was looking specifically at the UAE and Kuwait, why would I want to choose Kuwait over the UAE? What is there really for me to get my teeth stuck into from an investor's point of view?
Well, I think at the moment, of course, the UAE is still far ahead in terms of giving opportunities to foreign investment, even compared to any of the other Arab Gulf states. But Kuwait does still offer a lot of potential, simply because not much investment has happened in recent years. And there are many good opportunities in terms Kuwait is in dire need of much infrastructure investment in terms of its its roads, in terms of rail, in terms of the airport. There are many opportunities even in the oil sector where the Kuwaiti government is flush with cash. And even though we've had the recent election boycott, we now have a new parliament in place that is less opposition, that at the moment, of course, enjoys less legitimacy because there is still an opposition towards it. But if the government and the new parliament can get their act together and can try to push through legislation on investment, which is currently there are indications that this is happening, this will offer new opportunities inside Kuwait that one should look very closely at the upcoming developments.
But despite those opportunities in Kuwait, you've still got the issue which doesn't happen in the UAE, where whatever projects they want to push forward, they still have to have consent from Parliament.
Right? Well, yes, of course, this is still the case. But then the counter-argument would simply be that it just simply takes a little bit more time. But if there is a consensus that takes place between government and the parliament on the proper legislation, on the proper investment laws, then there's a consensus in the whole country. And that will give this whole thing much more of a legislative and as well as judicial base to make sure that your investment is safe, to make sure that the projects are moving forward. There is that opportunity at the moment if the new parliament performs well. There are still a lot of question marks, I would say, because the opposition is still quite strong. And at the moment, executive-legislative relations are not that positive. But there's an opportunity, and therefore Kuwait bears watching.
Okay, Christian, one word answer if possible. If you were to invest in Kuwait now, would you invest in Kuwait?
I would still wait a little bit.
You'd wait a little bit. Okay, thank you very much for coming into the studio. That's all from Dukascopy TV today. Don't forget to check out my colleague Jennifer's interview with Frank Hollenbeck later, but for now, goodbye.